Some days ago, I have just reviewed an Indonesian boutique IM brand, the 7th Acoustic Supernova, that is their flagship. And right now, I'm gonna review another Asian boutique brand, which is from Singapore, and this is the Symphonium. And right now, I'm gonna review their flagship, which is the Symphonium Helios, that costs around $1,100, and they are only using 4 balancer material, which is quite unique because at this price point, as you may have realized, that a lot of other companies they are usually using tri-bridge configuration or another unique configuration, such as using bone conduction or maybe the well-known electrostatic driver for their treble, but this company choose to use only 4 balancer mature. But yeah, as I have mentioned in some reviews before, that in the end the important things is definitely about the tuning. So just like usual, I will break down this review from the build, fit, frequency response, sound, and comparison. And thank you for Symphonium for sending me this Symphonium Helios IM, and this is actually part of Symphonium Helios Tour, so it will be sent back to Symphonium at the end of this tour. Build quality wise, for the housing, it is entirely made of aluminium, and for me it definitely feels strong. It feels not plasticky, and a little bit it has some weight on it that makes it really promising. And take a look at that. Even though it's using 4 balancer material, it is huge. It is really big. Maybe you could see that, especially around this part, it's really big. And not only the housing is big and thick, but the nozzle is also thick and big, so be careful. And then the cable itself, it has extra part around this part for recession, but strangely the housing itself has no recession, so it's a little bit long from this side. Yeah, it's quite long. And the cable itself is also has no ear guides, and I believe it's made of copper material, and it's braided with 4 strands. And actually you could order them with some choice according to you, whether you want a 4.4 balance jack or 2.5, or just like this, the single-ended 3.5 connector. Well, when it comes to the fit, I'm gonna say it right away that this is the worst part of this Helios, because I need to give you some sample first. Please take a look at this Kinera Idun Golden, which I consider to be a perfect fit IM for my ears. There are 3 points that I consider to must be really good in order to achieve that perfect fit. First of all is, of course, the nozzle. It needs to be not really long and not really big, so it could get into my ear hole easily. And then this part that will touch my concha, this part that will touch my inner ear parts, and also the ear gate, so it could help with the stability. Let me show you that all of that is just perfect here. And when I'm using them like this, like that, is just perfect. All of that part is touching my ears without any sharp part. And also the ear gate is really stable like this. It helps a lot with the stability when I'm shaking my head. That's what I call to be a perfect fit. And then even though my Sony IR-M9 doesn't have that kind of arch around this part, and also the ear gate itself doesn't really help with the stability like this, but the part that is touching my concha and also the nozzle, it definitely helps a lot. So yeah, it's not as good as the Kinera Idun, but it's still good. But those those points that I mentioned in the Kinera Idun Gold, please take a look at this now. Take a look at the shape from the upper side. You see that the nozzle part itself is already long enough and it's big. So yeah, this part is actually right from the beginning, it's not really comfortable. I need to say that I have a kind of small hole, so when I'm using any kind of ear tip, it will kind of push my inner side, so it's like pushing it to be a little bit bigger. And also this part is really long. If you take a look at the length from the lower side of this IM into the pin side here, so when I'm using them, please take a look at this. Here I'm using it. Now, I push them all the way in, but none of the other part of the body, especially from this part, is touching my ears. So it's not really stable. The only part that is touching my ears is only around this part, around the nozzle area. And then the ear guide itself, it doesn't really help because it doesn't really help around this part. The arch doesn't really touch my ears, so it's almost useless. See? So yeah, in terms of stability, even I should say that the fit itself, when I'm using them like this, it feels fine. But when I move a little bit, or maybe shaking my head a little bit, you could see that I already pushed them inside, but I could simply still wiggle them like this. And the ear guide itself doesn't really help. So I hope you understand. That is my biggest struggle with this Symphonium Helios. Symphonium Helios has some points that is emphasized. For me, it's definitely the sub bass around this part, and also the upper mid-range to treble area. It has amazing extension and quite a lot of presence, but it's quite lean, especially in the lower mid-range to the mid-bass area. So actually for me, it could be categorized as somehow a U-shaped response. Okay, when it comes to the sound, I have tried them using my iBass, so the X160, and also my i5 Zen Air DAC, Qlix 5K, and also Ovidius B1, and my own phone, the Samsung S10 Plus. And for me, they are more suitable, maybe matched with some warm source, because they are definitely bright sounding IM. So if you're using another bright sounding DAC or bright sounding source, it will sound a little bit dry. And also, it is quite hard to drive using my phone, the Samsung Galaxy S10 Plus. Even when I push the volume to the max, it doesn't have enough juice to give them justice. So yeah, definitely it's not for you who want to play this IM using your phone only. Definitely not recommended. And yeah, when it comes to tonal balance, I would say that they are still, I consider them to be somehow U-shaped-ish bright IM, where the main focus of this IM is mostly on the treble area, that is the star of this IM, and also the sub bass. Those 2 points are the contrast that I always feel in every song, in most of the songs. But the really great thing about this IM is about the clarity, the extension, and also the texture of the treble. For me, it is one of the best treble that I have ever tried, and it's one of my favorite treble, because it can reach really high, and also you feel that the overall signature, the sound of this IM is like when you feel a breeze, but not like a really cold icy breeze, but it's more like when you go up to the mountain, to the green mountains, and you feel that fresh breeze of air. That's what I feel when I hear this song. It's when I hear this IM, it's definitely leaning towards cold and bright kind of sound, but it's kind of fresh for me, because it doesn't really spiky in a lot of area, but rather it has a really soft texture. Not really soft, I should say it has a really great texture that keep it smooth and controlled, even though it is really clear and also outstanding. Okay, but I'm gonna break down the sound from the bass first. The bass, I would say that it is focused on the sub bass. It kind of reminds me of the, you know, the variations of the Moondrop, but Variation has much more sub bass punch, but it's almost similar here, just less punch from the Variations. But the focus, it's sometimes too much on the sub bass for me, so it really depends on the recording, that you might feel that the bass is punchy, the bass is kind of majestic, it's deep, but the punch, the thickness of the bass is not really there. So in some songs that don't really have a good sub bass punch, it's mainly sometimes on the mid bass, you don't really hear a lot of bass from this end. For example, I'm gonna give you just from Imagine Dragons, when you hear Believer, and where you hear yeah, when you hear believer or enemy in this IM, it will show a really good bass punch that deep and somehow textured, and really for me when you hear that sub bass, it is actually very interesting for balancer material to have such a texture and that bouncy texture that almost sounds like a dynamic driver. But when you hear Thunder, another song from Imagine Dragons, I feel that the bass is lacking in that. So yeah, it really depends. Well, when I'm hearing this using the IRM9, I never feel that the Thunder is lacking bass, but when I'm hearing from the Symphonium, it's lacking bass. It depends on the recording, obviously. And also the mid-range, going to the mid-range, it is still leaning towards lean sounding. It's not thick, warm sounding. It's leaning towards a lean and thin sounding, but the texture and also the clarity is really high. So when I hear piano and I hear guitar strings, I feel that a lot of clarity is. I can hear a lot of clarity going to the notes, every plucking of the guitar strings, and also every touch of the piano is really clearly portrayed in this Symphonium Helios. But the trouble comes when I hear male voices. So it's when it comes to lower mid-range, for me it's still not full enough for some male vocalists that has really thick voices. For such example, the Josh Groban and also Michael Bublé and Il Divo. For me, it's still lacking warmthness and fullness of the notes when it comes to male vocal. But if you hear female vocal, I think that there's no problem, because even though it has a push treble, the treble is definitely forward, and the upper mid range is forward too. But I don't hear a lot of sibilance. I would say that only in some certain tracks I hear a faint hint of sibilances, but mostly I don't hear that sibilances. But that clarity, that texture, and also the breadth of the voices coming from the female vocal, or like example Celine Dion and then Indila and also Celtic Woman, I could hear a lot of details and a lot of clarity from the pronunciation, from the voice of those female voice. So it's just amazing here. It's just a lot of clarity. But frankly saying, when the song has a lot of treble, sometimes because the treble is more pushed rather than the mid-range, for me, even though the female voice sounds amazing from this IM for me, but the positioning of the female voices is sometimes a little bit backward in positioning compared to the treble and also that sub bass. So yeah, it's still giving me that kind of U shape is signature tonal. Yeah, and then we're going to the highlight part of this IM, which is the treble. Treble just, whoa, amazing. And I have to say that using SpinFit somehow, SpinFit CP100 somehow helps me to get more of that treble. The treble is airy, it's really detailed, it's reaching the really high notes, but you don't hear harsh notes here. I don't feel there's harshness here, but it's really reaching high notes. So when I hear Beauty of Bali from Alfie Rev, at the beginning you hear some gamelan, you hear some flutes, you hear some birds, you will hear like it's flying from your upper head because of that imaging, because of that high notes that really goes really high in that song. Please try that song, it's amazing for me from the beginning of the song. And even though it's there's an EDM session in that song, The Beauty of Bali, for me, hearing them using this Symphonium Helios, still I feel that somehow my focus shifts towards the treble, because I heard really a lot of treble details. I do have some concern though. In some songs, it could be a little bit intense from some. I believe like when you hear Kiala Settles, some songs from The Greatest Showman can feel a little bit intense. But other than that, for me, a lot of songs, I really could hear a lot of really great details from the treble. So yeah, for me, yeah, treble is definitely spatial here. Maybe I have never heard such a really great detail from treble from any IMs before. This is one of the best treble that I've ever heard. And also, the technical, it's also really great. because of that treble goes really high and then the sub bass goes really deep, I definitely hear a really good resolution coming from this IM. It's really clear, it has a great clarity, detail and resolution. But when it comes to soundstage, I feel that the soundstage is not really like a three-dimensional ball, but it's more like oval ball that has more height dimension rather than left and right dimension. And also the imaging, somehow it's good a little bit like I said, like an oval position here. But nevertheless, for me, you definitely cannot underestimate this Ford driver, because it's just, here's the thing, I have a great Ford drivers IM2 like this C Audio Bravery, but for me it is miles ahead from the C Audio Bravery. So the technical, the finesse of the tonality is just another level. And also when it comes to comparison, I have to say that in $1,000 IM, I have heard a lot of IMs like the Andromeda and then the Unique Melody Max, also the Thea Audio Monarch Mark II, and also this IR-M9 that I have here. I would say that the IR-M9 is my favorite one right now. And the second one, if I should choose, maybe I'll really like this Helios. It comes in second place for my personal choice. I will explain later why. Because for me, the Thea Audio Monarch Mark II, the treble, I really like treble. For me, the Monarch Mark II has two soft treble, and the Unique Melody Max, again, it has one of the most rolled off treble in the $1,000 that I've mentioned. And yeah, so when the competition, for me, it comes to these two, which are my favorite. But for me, when it comes to all-rounderness, when it comes to matching for a lot of genre, for me, the Thea Audio Monarch Mark II and the IR-M9 are more well-balanced and more well-executed for a lot of music, especially because of that lower mid-range and also that mid-bass notes. I hear them more balanced throughout the frequency from this IR-M9 and also the Thea Audio Monarch Mark II. Okay, now comparing this two, I'm gonna focus in comparing this two only. This IR-M9 definitely feels much more secure in my ears. I don't need to say that. When it comes to the sound, the bass part, I could definitely feel the sub bass is more punchier here in the Helios, but the mid bass and also sub bass portion, I feel that it's still more balanced, and I hear more from this Sony IR-M9, especially when it comes to song like the Thunder from Imagine Dragons that I've mentioned. I hear more fullness and I hear more fun factor in this IR-M9. And also, they are both have this kind of bounciness texture that almost sounds like dynamic driver, but the IR-M9 has more bounciness and more texture that almost closer to the dynamic driver, but it is a little bit slower when it comes to speed compared to the Helios. So yeah, it definitely comes to your preference in terms of bass. The mid-range, for me, it's also more all-rounder in this IR-M9. It has more fullness when it comes to notes and also the voices from male vocals such as Josh Groban and Michael Bublé. But the breadth of the female vocal and also that clarity, I feel I hear more better in this Symphonium Helios. For example, like when I'm hearing Indila, Love Story, I hear more, I feel chills coming through my spine when I hear that from this Symphonium Helios. And the treble, I should say, even though that the IR-M9 could reach a really high notes, but this Helios has definitely another level of extension. But in some attacks, when it comes to percussion attacks, and yeah, it comes to somehow the IR-M9 is one of the most tips dependence that I've tried, but using these tips, the final audio tips, I could hear the percussion and also cymbal attacks is more perceivable in this IR-M9. So it sometimes is much more fun and engaging when it comes to dynamics. And what the extension and also the airiness, I feel that more in this Symphonium Helios. But overall, I should say that I actually like the Symphonium Helios treble more. But when it comes to bass, sometimes I like it more in the IR-M9, sometimes I like it in the Helios. But mostly when it comes to mid-range, I find that the IR-M9 is definitely more balanced and more suited towards a lot of genres. But the thing that makes them really different for me, the deciding factor when it comes to me, for my personal preference, which one should I buy, is the technical. For me, the Soundstage is more three-dimensional and definitely larger in this IRM9, especially when it comes to width dimension. So when I hear orchestral music and also live music, it's very obvious for me. But it's not as high when it comes to height dimension as this Symphonium Helios. And one more thing that I really love about this IRM9 is the almost godlike imaging from any IM that I've ever tried. Is when I hear orchestral music and bands and even some live music, I could definitely feel that pinpoint imaging from this IRM9 is one of the best that I've ever tried. The vocal is really focused like in the middle of the stage, and then you hear that bass coming from below you, and then the percussion treble coming from upward from the height dimension from your head, and also the piano and guitar sometimes really far from left and right, so that kind of imaging pinpoint where the sound is coming from, where the elements of the sound is coming from, is more separated and has more distance and space between the elements in this IRM9. And for me, that's still the deciding factor why IRM9 is still my personal favorite IM. The imaging is just unbeatable from what I've ever heard until this point. Even at this point, the Helios definitely cannot compete with that. But the Helios is not an all-rounder IM, I should say, but it's more like a collector IM, and it's more a specialized kind of IM because it has really great treble extension and detail. So for me in the end, okay, do I like it? Yes, I do like it, but there are some of the for me pretty bad choices for this IM, especially when it comes to cable and also that the shape of the IM itself. I definitely couldn't wear them for a long because of the fit. It's just a little bit problematic for me. But when it comes to sound, man, that treble, maybe if I have more money, maybe if I have more money for buying this, maybe I will buy this, because really that treble is just really special. So it's not for everyone, but if you have a chance to try them, please try them. You maybe fall in love with them because of how, yeah, they are just great. And never underestimate that for drivers. Okay, I think that's all I could say about this Symphonium Helios. Amazing IM. And if you have any question, please write down in the comments below, and see you next time. Bye bye.